This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insight on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Conversations.
A transformational healing process has begun on the planet Earth. Due to a profound change that has taken place in the energy field of collective human emotional consciousness, resources are now available to us to do healing that has never before been possible in recorded human history. Human beings now, for the first time, have the capacity to directly address the core issues of the human dilemma. The truth, as Robert Burney feels and understands it, is that who we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We are not here as some kind of punishment. We are here to experience being human, to go through that puzzling human experience we call life, the dance of life, the dance that is life, the dance of wounded souls. We are the wounded souls. We are the spiritual beings who have been wounded by coming into human bodies in the spiritually hostile environment that has been present on planet Earth for thousands of years. The conditions on the planet have changed. That is the joyous news that I have to share with you. The dance is changing. Since before the dawn of recorded history, the dance of life for humans has been primarily one of survival, of endurance, of suffering. We have now entered a very special time in human history. An age of healing and joy has dawned in human consciousness on this planet. We now have tools, knowledge, and most importantly, clearer access to healing energy and spiritual guidance than has ever before been available in recorded human history on this planet. The dance is changing. A transformational healing process has begun on planet Earth. We have begun the process of breaking out of the vicious, self-perpetuating cycles of destructive behavior that humans have been trapped in for thousands of years. The destructive dance is changing into a dance of healing. The new dance of healing is most simply called recovery, while the old destructive dance has acquired a new name, codependence. Valeria interviews Robert Burney. Robert Burney is a pioneer in the area of codependency recovery, inner child healing. His first book, Codependence, The Dance of Wounded Souls, has been called one of the truly transformational works of our time. And he has been described as a metaphysical Stephen Hawking, a counselor/coach and spiritual teacher whose work has been compared to John Bradshaw's, except much more spiritual, and described as taking inner child healing to a new level. Robert has developed a pioneering approach to codependency recovery, an inner child healing paradigm that offers a powerful, life-changing formula for integrated love, spiritual truth, and intellectual knowledge of healthy behavior into one's emotional experience of life. A blueprint for individuals to transform their core relationship with self and life. His website, joy2meu.com, offers over 200 pages of free original content, and he shares the transformational formula he discovered for inner healing through telephone/Skype counseling with people around the world and in day-long workshops that he offers periodically. A few years ago, he launched a mobile-friendly version of his site for all the people accessing the internet on mobile devices. joy2meu2.com. Here is the interview with Robert Burney.
In your own words, who is Robert Burney?
Well, I am a recovering alcoholic and addict. I've been clean and sober since January 3rd, 1984. And a recovering codependent. My conscious codependency recovery is starting on June 3rd, 1986. And I'm a coach and a counselor and a spiritual teacher and a pioneer in the inner child healing and codependency recovery movement.
Oh, wow. I have lots of questions for you so we can explore these areas. Before we talk about some of the topics in your book, The Dance of Wounded Souls, a cosmic perspective of codependence in the human condition, I have a few warm-up questions, as I mentioned, off record. What does it mean to be a human being, Robert?
What does it mean to be a human being? Well, I believe that who we really are is spiritual beings having a human experience.
Right.
And that we're just here going to boarding school and learning lessons and settling karma. But we got programmed in childhood the opposite, to think the opposite, and to look at, instead of knowing we have inherent worth because we're connected to the oneness of everything, we got taught that, like I got taught I was born sinful and shameful and deserved to be punished. So one of the things they talk about in the 12-step recovery program is living life on life's terms. And what I found is I had to redefine what life's terms were so that I could find a way of living that worked for me. Because the life's terms I learned in childhood don't work. They set me up to not be happy and not feel like I was lovable and worthy.
Tell me about it. I think we all can relate to that for sure.
Well, that in my book, I talk about how in order to change our perspective, our relationship with anything, we need to change our perspective of it. And I quote the old joke about three blind men describing an elephant by touch, and they're touching three different parts of the elephant, and they're describing three completely different things. And I said, each one is speaking his own truth. They just have a lousy perspective. And that's what codependency is we have a lousy perspective of who we are and how to do human, what the meaning and purpose of human life is. And so we ended up living our life. We got completely set up to not know how to do romantic relationships in a healthy way. We learned in childhood that we got dysfunctional programming starting with fairy tales. That taught us when we meet our prince or princess, we're going to live happily ever after. And then the fairy tales were followed up by the books and movies and the songs that taught us that what romantic love is I can't smile without you, I can't live without you, you are my everything. That's not love. That's an addiction.
Yeah, so true.
When we think the other person, we have to have the other person in our life to be okay. What we end up doing is trying to control the other person. And that's not love either,
That is so true. So true. I'm wondering how we can teach children to live in such a way with this healthy perspective. I mean, really a true perspective, in my view.
The biggest thing with kids is the role modeling. We need to get healthier ourselves in order to be healthy. As I say in my book, do as I say, not as I do doesn't work with kids. And we need to get healthier ourselves in order to be healthier parents and to teach our children healthier ways of living. I have an example in my book where I talk about like a 3-year-old, a mother's crying in her room, and a 3-year-old comes in and looks to the 3-year-old like mom's dying. And he says, "Mommy, I love you." And then she says, "Oh, I love you so much, honey. And come here." And I just really expresses her love for the little kid. But what I say here is it's a touching scene. I said, no, it's emotional abuse because the child just got the message that he has the power to save mommy's life.
Oh, wow.
What's really healthy is for the mother to say, no, it's okay to cry. Everybody cries sometimes. It's okay. We want a role model that it's okay to have feelings and how to deal with them in a healthy way instead of giving the child the message that they have the power over a parent's feelings. Because that's one thing that is real normal in our culture.
Yeah. What is the meaning of well-being to you?
Well-being, to me, well-being is about balance. It's about being balanced. And that's part of what we need to learn to do, is have some balance emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally. And so that's part of the healing process, is learning to find a sense of balance. Balance isn't someplace we get to and we stay at. I kind of compare it to a pendulum swinging. Part of what's so hard for codependents is to stop judging and shaming ourselves. The more we're judging and shaming ourselves, the wilder the swings of the pendulum are. They go to extremes. The less we judge and shame ourselves, the less extreme, the gentler the swings of the pendulum get. But we don't ever get to balance and stay there, because life's always rocking our boat a little bit.
Right.
So what we do when we get a sense of balance is we have tools. That's one of the things I talk to people about when I'm teaching them how to do the work I teach them to do, is they're developing a new toolbox to use when they start feeling a little bit out of balance, so that they can get themselves back to more balance. It's about, because part of what the fairy tales set us up for is to believe there's a destination to reach.
Right.
And no destination in life. Life is a journey, but we spend most of our life trying to get there. And there is there to,
It's funny, but it's true.
Learn to be more present, and be present in the moment, and be able to be in tune with ourselves enough to see when we're getting out of balance, so we can use our tools to get us back into balance.
Yeah, I love that idea. The methods. There are so many nowadays. You talk in your book too. We have so many healing methods available. So balance, that's an interesting topic. I'm wondering, what are the signs when we are balanced? For you, what are the signs when you feel balanced?
Part of being balanced is being present, being mindful, and just being present in the moment today, and being able to deal with whatever is life bringing us in a more balanced, grounded way, instead of reacting. When we haven't done the inner child work, what we do is we have these, our emotions are a vital part of our being. Our emotions are actually what tell us who we are, but we have all these emotional reactions that aren't telling us the truth. And when one of our buttons gets pushed, one of our inner child wounds gets triggered, we have these reactions and we're not being present in the moment. We're reacting. When we're reacting, we're reacting to how the child felt then, not what's appropriate for an adult of our age and knowledge and experience to feel in the situation today. But it feels like our total reality. It feels like our total truth.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we are driven by the unconscious mind, right, as well, if we are not aware, of course. So let me ask you a few questions about life in general. What is life to you?
Well, I believe that, like I said, like we're spiritual beings having a human experience, and that we come in just to body to go to boarding school, to learn lessons and to settle karma. And karma, I believe, is a law of energy interaction that dictates that every action of cause on the physical plane is paid for with an effect on the physical plane. And so, in other words, everybody ends up even. Nobody ends up in the hole. There's no hell in an afterlife. Everything, all the debts get paid here. What you sow, you reap. But it's over multiple lifetimes. And so those of us, I believe that the people who are forced to do the healing in this lifetime are old souls who were born at a heart chakra level of consciousness, and they're doing their healing and settling karma because they're near the end of the karmic merry-go-round. But most of the people on the planet are old souls, and they don't know what we're talking about. So,
right. So lifetimes, that's another interesting subject. Is that a belief, or this is a knowing that there are other lives after this one?
I think it's something I know. Yeah, what happened is when I got into 12-step recovery, I didn't want to hear. I wouldn't even say the word God, because I'd been raised in a religion that taught me I was going to burn in hell forever if I even thought about sex. I didn't have to do anything to go to hell. And I didn't like that God. So when I first got into recovery, I would say the force is with me, because I always resonated with that. Or I spent time with the Native Americans, and I really loved the concept of the Great Spirit, whose energy is present in everyone and everything. But they told me in the 12-step recovery program, which is part of the genius of the 12-step recovery program is that I could have a higher power of my own understanding. And so that started me on a spiritual quest to figure out how there could be a loving higher power in the universe. And one of the first leaps I had to make, one of the first shifts in perspective, paradigm shifts, was to see that if we're only here one time, there's no way it's loving and positive. You know, we've got starving children over here and billionaires over here, and that there's no way that can be loving and fair. And so it has to be over a span of multiple lifetimes where everything evens out in the end. And so, and then I did a lot of investigation of past lives, of my own past lives and stuff, and so I believe that there are past lives, and that I'm doing karmic settlement for some of the stuff that happened then. Now,
right. So this is very much based on our own experience, right, Robert? To say that we know about lifetimes and all that, it's something that we can only speak from our own experience. I know that there are so many religious beliefs out there, Buddhism, Hinduism, and so many others. I really believe in direct experience. I think that's the most reliable source when it comes to any kind of knowledge. So I have one more question, follow-up question to that one, what life is. What do you think is the opposite of life?
Well, in my book, I say that evil is live spelled backwards. So I believe, that codependency is the human condition as we've inherited it, and that the human condition was caused by planetary conditions. It's not caused by human beings being flawed and defective. It wasn't because of some, dude in a garden who didn't have any boundaries, and I believe it's because of planetary conditions. And that those planetary conditions started off with the polarization of the lower mind, the energy field of collective human intellectual consciousness. And that polarization caused people to see themselves as separate from each other and separate from God. That's what made violence possible, what made it possible to start killing the planet, so that it's that illusion of separation that was the original wound that was caused by the polarization.
Right. In a way, you're saying that separation, that sense of that idea of separation, it might be the opposite of life.
Yeah, it is, because it's an illusion and it's not the truth, And of course, in Hindu, I think Maya is the word for both illusion and life and death is just, like one of the things I say in my book is we get taught to fear and ignore death and to never live life. And what I believe is we want to learn to live life and know that death's going to happen. It's going to be a transition to a better place, I believe. I choose to believe that.
Yeah.
That what's the real tragedy is, and what's the opposite of living is to not be able to live life, to live life in unconsciousness and to live life in the matrix.
Yes. Yeah. The illusion. Right. What do you think, or what is the meaning of freedom to you? What is to be free?
Well, freedom is really about having freedom from judging and shaming myself, freedom from feeling like I'm my own worst enemy, feeling like I'm flawed and defective somehow, freedom to be alive and to be open to feeling joy and love and peace in the moment every day of my life. And but also, in order to do that, I had to be willing to feel the anger and the pain and the grief also, because in childhood I learned to stuff my feelings and to block the anger and the pain and the grief, and that caused me to block the love and the joy and the peace. And so I believe that we can access, that there's a transformational vibrational emotion that we can access in the moment by being in the moment. And and the easiest place for most of us to do that is in nature,
yes.
Animals, or with kids.
Yes.
Hardest place to do that is with other people, because that's where our wounding came from, and that's where all our defenses are.
Oh, wow. So true. Yeah, the healing process, in my case, had been a lot of the unpleasant experience around human beings. And then I noticed how I am drawn to human beings all the time. I want to be close to them. We are not separate. How wonderful. I really love this experience, this journey. It's fascinating. So My other question is about what's happening here, the current situation. At this time, what do you think is the world's greatest need? And do you have a vision for a new reality?
I don't really have a vision for a new reality, but what is going on in the world right now is the poison's coming to the surface. We're going through a planetary cleansing, and sometimes when we have to go through a cleansing, the poison comes to the surface, and the poison is the polarity. It's the whole us against them kind of stuff. When the lower mind was polarized, that's when we started seeing yin and yang as competing forces instead of one whole, and that's part of what causes the illusion of separation. And right now we've got polarization all over the world, and it's there. I don't know if have you ever heard of the Great Council of Grandmothers? It's an organization of, I think it's 13 different grandmothers from different Native American Aboriginal tribes around the world. And last year, somebody put something up on Facebook about it. And this is a statement that they put out in November of 2016. You have elected not a man, but a Moy to lead you. He is a boy in an old man's body. Moys are a combination of man and boy, but mostly boy. Wow. They are large and have loud voices, so people mistake them for men, but they are not men. A man thinks of the common good, while a Moy has not learned to think of anyone but himself. He has not fully developed and is still a child. Your country has elected a Moy to be its next president. Russia, as well as Syria, are already run by Moys, while Africa is overrun with them, each Moy creating havoc in his area on that continent. The Philippines is run by a Moy, and so are several other countries. Is it any wonder the world is lurching from crisis to crisis? And so that fits in with what I understand about the planetary conditions and this polarization coming to the future, coming to the surface. And I really have no idea how it's going to look afterwards.
Yeah, right. Wow.
It's all illusion anyway, so.
It is, Robert. Yeah, it is. I have 3 more questions for you, and one of which is about peace. So I'll ask you in a moment because it made me think about inner peace. That's the only place we can really find peace. So let me ask you this question before that. What is love to you? What is your understanding of the word love?
It's interesting. I have a series of articles called The True Nature of Love. And the first one turned out to be what love is not. And because what's triggered the whole thing was here. I don't know if I heard it or read it or it was just an intuitive thing, but the message, the line was, if somebody loves you, it should feel like they love you. And in my article, I started off talking about that and that I had realized that I had never in my life at that point experienced somebody loving me that it felt like they loved me. What it felt like is they were controlling and manipulative and shaming and abusive and all this other stuff, and that's not love. And so then I went on to my next article. I started writing what love was, and I realized that I was having trouble starting writing the article, and so sometimes what I'll do is a word will come to mind, and I'll look the word up, and I looked the word up, and it was empirical, and it says that by experience, in I can't remember the exact words, but in your experience, and then it says as opposed to meta-empirical, which is like metaphysical, it's beyond experience, and then what I realized as I was writing that is that when I say that love is not painful and controlling and manipulative, that's not my experience telling me that. That's my intuition telling me that. And if I had gone by my experience, I would have said, love is controlling and manipulative and painful.
That's a very good point. Yeah, I just mentioned earlier about having the experience. Whatever we talk about, it's important to have had the experience. But it's true for certain things like love or the ultimate truth about life, especially unconditional love. I think it can be felt, but it's very challenging to put into words. Yeah, it's beyond words, right? So my next question is about peace. What is peace to you, Robert? How do you define this word?
Well, I remember the first time I ever was conscious of feeling serenity my response was, ew, what's this? I feel empty inside because I didn't have all the churning and all the conflict going on. That the more I learned to change my relationship with myself in life, so I believe that the Serenity Prayer is a mystical formula about how to do life successfully. I need to let go of trying to control things I can't control, like other people in life, and take some loving control over the things I can control. But we programmed growing up to live the Serenity Prayer backwards, to think we should be in control of things we can't control, like other people in life, and to not have any effective way of taking control of things we can, because we learn to try to control ourselves with shame and judgment and fear. We shame and judge ourselves. The rebel in us rebels against that and does what I call the battle cry of codependence, which is, I'll show you, I'll get me. So if somebody does something to hurt me, then I do something to hurt myself. So I needed to learn to have loving internal boundaries, to stop the critical parent voice in my head from shaming and judging me, and to be loving parent to the inner child wounds inside of me, stop them from running my life. At the same time, I was being loving and kind to them. And part of being a loving parent is setting boundaries, but it needs to be consistent boundaries. Consistent boundaries make children feel very insecure and unsafe. And when we have, when our parents were emotionally unhealthy and wounded, they couldn't give us consistent boundaries, and so we felt unsafe and insecure. And so by developing an empowered adult part of us that can set boundaries of the critical parent voice and to be the loving parent to the inner children, then I could start finding a place where I had inner peace, no matter what was going on outside of me.
Yes. Yes, 1,000 times to that. I have a question before the last one. I have to ask you this one. How do we know when we are letting go and when we are giving up?
Well, when they first got into recovery, they talked about surrendering, and I thought that I was losing,
Yeah.
I felt like enough of a loser already. Somebody told me at one point that surrendering is just meaning you join the winning side, And so what I came to realize is that the purpose of me making plans is so that my higher power, the universe, can teach me how to let go and surrender and accept and have patience, and that, I need to keep following where I'm led, but I need to keep letting go of thinking I know where I'm going, because I don't, because my higher power tends to let me think I'm going where I want to go when it's where I need to go. And so I just need to keep letting it go. And so letting go isn't something you do and it's done with, letting go is something we do over and over and over again. And what I learned to do is, there was a saying that I heard in early recovery that became like my mantra, and it was, more will be revealed, and what I came to realize is that more is revealed on a need-to-know basis, and it's not my idea of when I need to know. The universe's idea of when I need to know often feels to me like the last fucking second. Oops, excuse me. But often feels like the last second. And I need to just keep letting go of thinking I need to know the plan, because I'm not in charge. I need to take actions. I need to plant seeds. I need to do the groundwork, but I need to keep letting go of thinking I'm not going to be okay until I get there, because that's that old destination thinking. When I realized I was in fear, and fear is always about the future, and when I realized I was in fear, I would say to myself, that's about the future. I don't need to know that today. Let that go for today, And I also realized I spent a lot of my life trying to and worrying about decisions I never had to make. So I learned to say to myself, I don't need to know that today. I don't need to decide that today. I'll turn that over to my higher power.
Wow, I love that. This idea of trust. And if we can do this in every moment, then it would be, it's just a practice for life. That's wonderful. I'm practicing every moment just to stay here and not wonder.
Yeah. And the ego tries to take control again, so we have to let it go again, and let go again, and let go again. But yeah, so that's but that's about being conscious of what's going on inside of us, and not letting the outside stuff define us.
Exactly. Yes. My last question: do you ever use the word God?
Yeah, I use the word God now. I didn't in early recovery. Most often, though, I like to use God, Goddess, Great Spirit. I actually have one thing that I wrote that I'm never going to finish, but the first thing I wrote that starts off once upon a time in a place where there is no time, in a place where there is no place, God was alone. And I describe God as being the energy of all that is, vibrating at the frequency of absolute harmony, which is love, all capital letters. And I call it the Holy Mother Source energy. And I think that's what is truly God. But God's a word I can use now, which I couldn't in the beginning of recovery.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I understand. Wonderful. So let's talk about your work. My first question has to be this one. How did you become a writer, and what was the inspiration and intention of writing your book, The Dance of Wounded Souls?
Well, I can remember a moment in my teenage years when I got a message that I was going to write a book of truth one day. But I had no idea what truth was at that point. After I got sober, so I said I was working on being a writer, but I wasn't really writing. I actually was doing an acting career for some years, and I played around a little bit with writing, but I wasn't really writing. After I got sober, in my 5th year of sobriety, I went to a treatment center for codependency. And as I was leaving the treatment center, I ran into one of the family therapists, and she said, "You know what you are as a mystic." And I didn't even know what she was talking about. So I had to look up in the dictionary and find out what a mystic is. But that caused me to open up to a certain kind of getting communication. And first thing I started writing was this mystical, magical fairy tale fable where it starts off with "Once Upon a Time." And in that piece of work, my higher self appears to me as a unicorn that gallops off of a picture on my desk when I was in my casita in Taos, New Mexico, and then takes me on a journey through time and space and teaches me things. And that was so I started writing that. I wrote a lot of that off and on for a couple of years. But in the meantime, I was doing my codependency recovery and inner child healing, and I was thinking of them as two different things, and then they came together, And in the early 90s, codependency became a big buzzword, and there were a lot of coda meetings and people were asking me to speak in different places, and I started hearing myself say things in public that were mystical kind of information that I never thought I'd say in public. And I realized that there was a message coming through me. So I set up some dates to do a talk in June of 1991. And then I couldn't write it because it wasn't linear and I couldn't figure out how to organize it. But the last 48 hours before the first time I gave it, I wrote almost continuously. And when I first gave the talk, it was on yellow legal pad. And that was the basic outline of the book. Of my book, Dance of Wounded Souls, and it evolved some over the years, but that's where the book was written. So I say I wrote it in it took me many years, and it took me 48 hours, because it was, and so I wrote it because I felt the message coming through me, and I had gotten the message already earlier in my recovery that my job in this lifetime, my mission in this lifetime, was to stand up in public and speak my truth, even if the whole world said I was crazy. So when I came to do the talk for the first time, I felt like I was remembering being stoned by an angry mob. It was scary up there, but then the people could hear me. Amazed that they could hear me.
Wow, that's an amazing story, and that's life itself manifesting through you. I have a question for you about the soul. Is it the soul the same as the spirit? Do you connect those two words?
Well, in a way, yeah. I mean, there's soul with a capital S, which is a higher level of the soul, and then there's soul with a small s that comes into human body, and that I think is the same as a spirit. But this is all, all this is a dance of energy. This is all, in my book, I use quantum physics and molecular biology to describe God, because it's all a dance of energy. We're all part of one dance of energy, and there are different levels to it. And the highest level, the one that's closest to the oneness of the Holy Mother Source energy, is what they call cosmic consciousness or Christ consciousness. And we all have access to that inside with our own inner channel to the truth. But then there's other levels down from that And the soul is, with the capital S, is one of the higher levels, and the soul that comes into human body is basically the same as the spirit, I think.
Right. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's talk about codependency or codependence. What is codependence, Robert?
Codependence is it's outer or external dependence. We were taught to look outside of ourselves to find out our self-definition and self-worth. People, place, and things, money, property, and prestige, accomplishments, popularity, relationships, and also to external manifestations of our own being, like looks and talent and intelligence. And I believe that what I learned when I realized that I was looking outside for that self-definition and stuff, I learned to draw a boundary for myself, make a distinction between ego strength and true self-worth. So the ego strength is about the outside or external things, and there's nothing wrong with any of them. Nothing wrong with good looking or smart or rich or successful. It's when we think that's what gives us worth that we're being codependent. And I believe it's actually, it is actually, like worshiping false gods or being too attached to the illusion. And I believe our true worth comes from our spiritual essence, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We're connected to the source. We're extension of the divine. We're the force is with us. We're children of the God or the goddess and part of the great spirit, however we want to say it. But our true worth comes from being connected to the one, that we're connected to the oneness of everything. All human beings have inherent worth because they're connected to the oneness of everything, and not because of the temporary outside stuff. But we were taught the exact opposite. We were taught to look outside for our self-worth and our self-definition. And that sets us up to be codependent. We were also taught to compare ourselves to others. Growing up in codependent cultures, we learned self-worth was a competitive issue, which means everyone has to have some other people to look down on in order to feel good about themselves. And firstly, they have somebody to look up to that feel like they're not there yet. So here isn't okay, but we're better than them, but we're not going to be okay till we get there. It's a crappy, horrible way to live.
True. So true.
We inherited it. Because of the polarization of the lower mind, it caused the energy field of collective human emotional consciousness to be reversed to the truth of love and a loving God for thousands of years. And I believe that energy field of human emotional consciousness reversed back into positive alignment with a loving higher power in the late 80s, around the time of the harmonic conversion. And that was actually the dawning of the age of Aquarius, whose energy is very different from the age of Pisces, which preceded it. And so we are in a new age. I call the age of healing and joy, but we still have this polarization of the lower mind that needed to be dealt with, and that's what's going on now. So what that I got off on all that.
Wow, that's all wonderful to me. And that's all within the subject, the topic of healing and joy. So do you connect the mind to consciousness? Are they all the same as well, or connected somehow?
Yeah, there's different levels of consciousness, and there's a collective consciousness, and the mind is much bigger than the brain, I believe, mind is, and so there, and I think we are all connected in consciousness. But we have, part of the illusion is we have this individual identity, which is not the higher truth. We're all one, highest level. It's like the whole thing about having free will is bullshit, because on the highest level there is no one has a choice to separate, because separation is an illusion. So on the lower levels, there's choices, but not on the highest level. And so we're all connected in that oneness. Yeah, it's all energy. And like I said, so we have an energy field of our intellectual consciousness, and it forms an energy field that we interpret, a life around us out of it, and our emotional reactions come out of our interpretations of our mind. But the mind and the thoughts and feelings are two different, distinct energies that we need to really learn to separate, so that we don't so that we can start changing how we're relating to life, like that perspective, like I said, and start setting boundaries with the critical parent voice. We have this programming in our own mind that's an enforcer. Codependency is an ego defense system adapted in early childhood to help us survive. And it's emotional, because in early childhood, what happens, the core of this wounding comes about because of the natural child developmental process. The part of a child's brain that understands cause and effect and logic and abstract concepts like time or death doesn't fully develop until around 7 years old. And, prior to that, children are egocentric and magical thinking. My grandson, a few months after his 7th birthday, on the way to school one day, all of a sudden he pipes up and says, how does Santa Claus get to every house in the world in one night? And his mind is maturing, and he's starting to understand logic, and you realize that's a ridiculous concept. But prior to 7, children are egocentric and magical thinking. So when we're little kids, our parents are our higher powers. They're the God and goddess in our life. We're not capable of processed thought. When we're 3, 4, 5, 6, we're not capable of saying to ourselves, wow, mom must be really stressed out. That's why you're yelling at me. So we just know mom's yelling at us. We just know. So anything painful in the environment, any kind of abuse or deprivation, if fighting, anxiety, alcoholism, depression, whatever's going on in the family, we end up internalizing it, feeling like it's our fault because we're the center of the universe as far as we know. And that's where the core of the disease comes from. It's what I call toxic shame. And the difference between guilt and shame, in my definition, is that guilt is about behavior. I did something wrong. I made a mistake. Shame is about our being. Something's wrong with me. I'm a mistake. And the ego, which is a part of our being whose job is able to survive, then adapts this emotional and behavioral defense system to try to help us survive and keep hidden from other people that we're shameful and unworthy. And it's a lie, all based on this lie that we're shameful and unworthy. So that's
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So for people who are codependent, which most of us have been there, or still are there, the ones who still act like children, what is the most effective healing method?
To change our core relationship with ourselves. That's the thing about codependency. It causes us to feel like the victim of our own thoughts and our own feelings and like our own worst enemy. And so what I learned in my recovery and what I teach to people is how to set internal boundaries and to start changing that core relationship with ourselves. And so, we need to, the big tool, the primary tool is to start developing a detached observer perspective or witness perspective that eventually becomes the empowered adult part of us. But it's real important to start recognizing, I used to think that the critical parent voice in my head was just how I thought. I didn't realize everybody has a critical parent voice. And it's environmental and it's conditioned reflex. And that it wasn't part of my true self. It's not telling me the truth. And so I needed to start recognizing that, our critical parent voice has been interpreting and translating life for us out of the programming from childhood, which is to relate to life from fear, shame, and scarcity. And so we need to stop letting it do that. And so we need to develop this detached observer, but we already have a witness perspective. It's a critical parent voice, And so we need to start recognizing that wasn't telling me the truth. And so I need to start developing this observer perspective. And one of the things I always point out to people when I'm working with them, I ask them if they've been involved in Eastern meditation practices because they teach an observer perspective in the meditation practices, but it's a passive observer where people observe their thoughts and their feelings, but they don't actually change anything. So this observer perspective I teach people is a proactive intervening observer. So we actually go in and change the ego programming. We actually change the neural pathways in our brain by developing the internal boundaries.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It made me also think about self-love. Do you believe in unconditional self-love?
Well, yeah, but the thing is that, there's when I first got in 12-step recovery, I heard them tell me that my problem was I was selfish and self-centered, but I also heard it was a selfish program and to thine own self be true, And so when I studied that, I realized there's 2 different levels of self. There's a ego self, which is what was programmed and wounded in childhood, and that's what codependency is all about, and that's where our addictions and compulsions come from. And there's spiritual self, which is the part of us that knows that everything is one, and that love is the highest truth. And so what we want to do is start letting spiritual self be what's in control of our life instead of ego self. Like I say in my book, selfishness out of ego self is destroying the planet. Selfishness out of spiritual self will help us as well. We'll save the planet. And so we need to accept, part of what we need to do is make a distinction between, with internally, in terms of ourselves, we are unconditionally loved. We always have been. We're part of the oneness. We have always been unconditionally loved. And so we are already unconditionally loved, but we need to learn how to love ourselves in a healthy way in this incarnation in our human bodies, because the ways we learn to love ourselves growing up are all dysfunctional and toxic.
Yeah, true, Robert. So it's accessing that part of us that's already, that unconditional love already exists, is already there. It's a matter of accessing that, right?
It's a matter of relaxing into it. It's like we don't get there by trying harder. We get there by doing the work so that we can be present and just relax into it and connect to it in the moment.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. You talk about spiritual evolution and spiritual revolution. What is the difference?
I don't know if there is a difference. I mean, I've always considered that spiritually evolving was the revolution. And so, yeah, I mean, the first time that somebody told me I was a spiritual being having a human experience, my first response was to get angry. And my first thought was, that means I got to be out among them, because I always want to go up on a mountain and meditate my way to God, And when I heard that I was a spiritual being having a human experience, I realized I'm not here to get spiritual. I'm already spiritual. I'm here to bring the spiritual into my human experience.
Right.
And that means I need to be out among them. We manifest spirituality in our relationships. And that, the way we relate to everything, whatever it is and because that's where the highest truth exists, is in our relationships, because everything else is an illusion. We're all illusions. But in our relationship, it's like I say, when I'm able to be present and appreciate a beautiful sunset, the sunset's an illusion, I'm an illusion, but the beauty of the sunset is the highest truth in that interaction,
I love the way you put that, the way you say that is bringing the spirit, living through the lens of the spirit, of the soul, bringing the spirit into the human experience, right?
And we make a distinction between, most all of us have engaged in some shameful behavior. That doesn't make us shameful being. A distinction between being and behavior. We've all had some addictive or compulsive behavior that we may have been ashamed of afterwards, but that doesn't make us a shameful being. The codependency causes us to feel like there's something wrong with who we are. And there's nothing wrong with who we are. It's our relationship with who we are that's all screwed up.
The relationship, it goes back to the relationship, right? Beautifully said and true. We're almost at the end, but I have so many points here. We won't be able to go through all of them, but I wanted to touch base to this because this is an interesting subject to me as well. You say a vital part of this healing process is finding some balance in our relationship with the masculine and the feminine energy within us. So talk to me about these two energies that a lot of times we think that they're separate and the male, the female.
Well, it's like I said, it's like the yin and yang are part of one whole. The masculine and feminine are complementary forces that work in conjunction with each other. They're not in conflict. They're not in competition. But we got all this screwed up programming. Sometimes when people ask when did codependency start, if I go into more detail, I say, this was happening thousands of years ago, and what was described in the Bible and other places was the conditions as they existed after codependency started. And so I use the example of the Garden of Eden, where Eve got blamed because Adam didn't have boundaries. And that's been going on for thousands of years. That women got blamed because men didn't have boundaries.
Wow.
And that's pretty screwed up.
Yeah. And I'm thinking here because this term codependence, and then makes me think about the opposite would be independence.
Interdependence.
Oh, interdependence. That's what would that be, right? Okay. The balance.
When, codependent relationship is one where we give away power over our self-esteem to other people, make other people or outside of us our higher power. An interdependent relationship is two whole people choosing to be allies or partners. And when we choose to become an ally with somebody, when we choose to give somebody the power to make us happy, we also give them the power to make us hurt us, And so we need to own that we have choices over who we give power over our feelings. And that's real different from giving power over our self-esteem. And so we need to be, part of that's really it's really important to get emotionally honest with ourselves so we can have the capacity to be honest with anybody else. But we need to, anytime we care about anything or anybody, it's our car, our apartment, or whatever, we're giving some power away, and then we give us the power to hurt us. And so we need to take responsibility for those feelings.
Right.
We make a choice. It's like I had to take it down to the level where I realized that falling in love is a choice. We get taught about falling in love in our culture like as a camouflaged hole in the sidewalk that we accidentally fell in.
Right.
We get taught to be the victim of love. Well, I can't help it. I love him or I love her, and that's bullshit.
Right.
Being the victim, not only we have choices. And so we really need to take it down to make better choices, because part of codependency is feeling trapped, feeling like we don't have any choice. And we always have a choice. I have one of my articles where I say, if somebody sticks a gun in your face and you says your money or your life, you do have a choice. And a lot of times in life, we don't like our choices. But if we don't own that we have choices, then we're buying into being a victim. And we need to own that we have the power to choose. And a big part of it is learning that, that what we have some control over is almost nothing. But what we do have some control over is our own attitudes and behaviors. And that we can, choose what attitude to take towards the things we can't control. We need to own we have the power to choose to where to focus our mind and what to give power away to and who to give power away to. But then we need to take responsibility for that, and we need to stop sabotaging ourselves with our old patterns, because the way codependency works is we're drawn to people who feel familiar. And we attract people who feel familiar, and the reason they feel familiar is because they're recreating our childhood emotional dynamics with our parents. So it's really important for me to realize if I met somebody that felt like my soulmate, I better watch out.
That's interesting. We have to go against our own intuition in a way.
Yeah. Well, and not our intuition, actually. It's the childhood programming, because the problem that happens when we meet somebody that feels like our soulmate is we have this desperately needy, desperately lonely inner child who's starved for love and attention and affection and touch and all the good stuff, and wants a relationship so bad that we jump right in with that and ignore all the red lights and warning signs. If you think back to any relationship that turned out badly, you'll remember that there were red lights and warning signs at the beginning. And that's what you have to do, is get more conscious and be willing to ask the tough questions and call people on their stuff right away. So I had a client years ago who put it real well. She said she realized that in every relation, and all her life in her relationships with men, she was coming from a place like she was auditioning. Oh. Does he like me? Does he like me? Never stopping to ask, do I like him? What we need to do is be the auditioner and be asking ourselves, is this person somebody I want to invest my time and energy in, my heart and soul in, let alone my heart and soul, and pay attention to the red lights warning signs, because people tell us who they are pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And we need to recognize that and pay attention to what they're telling us so that we can make better choices about who to invest our time and energy in.
Right. I agree. I love this idea of self-knowledge, self-awareness, consciousness, and interconnectedness. So now we have that space for possibilities, knowing what our choices are. That's so true. I love your work. So I have a few final questions for you. Would you like to add anything or read a passage in your book?
Okay, here's a passage from my book. I say in the book, there's a quote from the book. There are certain books of truth that I was led to that were especially important in my consciousness raising, in my recovery process. I'm now going to quote a story from one of those books, which means a lot to me. It's a story from a book called Medicine Cards by Jamie Sands and David Carson. This book deals with the medicine wheel and the totem animals of the medicine wheel spiritual beliefs of certain Native American tribes. The subject of this particular story is the swan totem, swan power. As Swan looked high above Sacred Mountain, she saw the biggest swirling black hole she had ever seen. Dragonfly came flying by, and Swan stopped him to ask about the black hole. Dragonfly said, "Swan, that is the doorway to the other planes of imagination. I have been the guardian of the illusion for many, many moons. If you want to enter there, you would have to ask permission and earn the right." Swan was not so sure if she wanted to enter the black hole. She asked Dragonfly what was necessary for her to earn entry. Dragonfly replied, "You must be willing to accept whatever the future holds as it is presented without trying to change the Great Spirit's plan." Swan looked at her ugly little duckling body and then answered, "I will be happy to abide by the Great Spirit's plan. I won't fight the currents of the black hole. I will surrender to the flow of the spiral and trust what I am shown." Dragonfly was very happy with Swan's answer and began to spin the magic to break the pond's illusion. Suddenly, Swan was engulfed by a whirlpool in the center of the pond. Swan reappeared many days later, but now she was graceful and white and long-necked. Dragonfly was stunned. "Swan, what happened to you?" explained. Swan smiled and said, "Dragonfly, I learned to surrender my body to the power of the Great Spirit and was taken to where the future lives. I saw many wonders high on Sacred Mountain, and because of my faith and my acceptance, I have been changed. I learned to accept a state of grace." And I say a state of grace is the condition of being loved unconditionally by our Creator without having to earn that love. We are loved unconditionally by the Great Spirit. What we need to do is learn to accept the state of grace. The way we do that is to change the attitudes and beliefs within us that tell us we are not lovable. And we cannot do that without going through the black hole. The black hole we need to surrender to traveling through is the black hole of our grief. This journey within through our feelings is a journey to knowing that we are loved, we are lovable. It's through willingness, acceptance, through surrender, trust, and faith that we can begin to own the state of grace, which is our true condition.
How beautiful. That summarizes everything in a way. Well, it doesn't take away the work that we need to do, right, Robert, to get there.
We have to get awareness before we can change. We have to get aware that the way we're doing things isn't because there's something wrong with it. It's because of how we were programmed and wounded.
Right. So true. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. I love your wisdom. It's profound. I have 3 questions for you, final questions. What is another word for healing?
I don't know, recovery, I guess.
Yeah. If you knew you would die soon, meaning losing the body, would you make any change in your life or do anything differently?
Well, it's interesting because, with this COVID thing, I'm in a susceptible group. I've got a couple of underlying conditions and I'm a boomer, and so what I did is I started doing these Zoom workshops for people around the world where I share the formula I learned, for integrating the spiritual truth into our emotional relationship with life, because I wanted to spread it to as many people as possible in case I do exit,
That's wonderful. Yeah, and you're very much aware of that. The lessons that we're all here to share, right, that we have learned. So I have one more question. What are 3 things about this reality that you know for sure?
Well, what I know for sure is that I am a spiritual being having a human experience, and that I'm here going through boarding school, and then I'm going to get to go home, and I'd be glad to go home. I never felt like this was. I always felt like somebody screwed up in the transporter room and sent me to the wrong place, because I never felt home, and always tried to go home. And that's what I wanted. Some things I talk about in my book is that addictions, compulsions, obsessions, those are all attempts to raise our vibrational frequency so we can go home, because we all know we feel like we can tell this is not home, That's why we did all these things to try to raise our vibrational frequencies, because we were trying to go home. And so it's really important to be able to forgive ourselves for not knowing how to do it in a healthy way.
When you say home, just for clarification, where is home?
Well, there's, this place I'm living in now feels like home here. It's the first place I'd ever been. It felt like home on the planet. But home to me is back and part of the oneness. It's been, I've always felt like I wanted to go home and it wasn't here,
Right. I mean, we have been talking about accessing or allowing that unconditional love, divine force to take hold of us. Would that make this now home when we access that?
Well, we can connect to that unconditional love. We can connect to the joy in the moment, for moments. We can't stay connected to it while we're in body. We can't get enlightened and be in a place called enlightenment. I believe that it is we connect to it temporarily in the moment, and while we're here, but hopefully that we'll be able to get there some one of these days.
Yeah, it might be that to get there, it's just goes back to that idea of acceptance, is surrender again, just being in between the opposites. So not choosing really sides, and we know there's no separation anyway. So it has been a wonderful conversation. I love how genuine you are and the profound wisdom that you're sharing with all of us. Thank you so much, Robert.
Okay, cool. It's great to be here. Where
can we find more information about you, your books, products, services, and future projects?
Well, my website is joytomeyoume.com. So it's 7 characters, 6 letters and a number. So it's JOY, the number 2, ME, letter U. And I also have a mobile-friendly website, which is joytomeyou2.com. And so if you look up Joy to Me You, you'll find me.
Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Bye for now, Robert.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Robert Burney, please visit his website, joytomeu.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. I want to thank the Patreon members, Mark Basden, Terry Clayton, and Aidan Vickrock. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.